Hello, everyone. So today's lesson, I'm going to review what we talked about in class, analyzing complex characters' interactions and determining their purpose. So we discussed how Steinbeck uses a lot of dialogue in Of Mice and Men and what the purpose of that dialogue was. And we really narrowed it down to 3 different purposes. Number 1, you could determine the purpose of the dialogue is to reveal something about the character. So, for example, in this dialogue between George and Lenny, what we discovered was that it revealed something about Lenny through the dialogue. So, a lot of your different answers were the purpose of the dialogue was to show that Lenny wanted to know where George and him were going. Lenny forgot since he had short-term memory. So we really kind of determined that one of the character traits of Lenny is that he's forgetful based on this dialogue between Lenny and George. Another thing that we talked about was how dialogue can reveal the setting of a story just by looking at the different dialect. So we noticed words like goin' without the ending consonant sound of the G, and the already, A-W-R-E-A-D-Y, alluded to the idea that wherever these characters were coming from was probably an uneducated area, since they weren't able to really speak properly. So again, dialogue in this case revealed something about the characters, and it also revealed something about the setting. We continued to analyze different pieces of dialogue. Another excerpt that we looked at was a conversation between George and Lenny, where George tells Lenny that he needs to not say anything to the boss, and Lenny has to repeat this 2 or 3 times over. Again, the purpose of this dialogue was for Steinbeck to show the reader that Lenny is extremely forgetful, and that George sometimes is very controlling over Lenny and kind of treats him like an older brother and constantly tells him what to do. And the final piece of dialogue that we studied together as a class was a conversation again between George and Lenny, where George and Lenny were arguing about whether or not they could have ketchup with their supper, and George goes on to tell him that there isn't any ketchup, and they get into an argument. And after the argument is kind of concluded, Lenny calls out to George and says, "I was only fooling George. I don't want no ketchup. I wouldn't eat no ketchup if it was right here beside me." And he continues on later to say he'd leave it all for George. And this, again, the idea was for Steinbeck to reveal something, a character trait about Lenny. So a lot of you guys noticed that Lenny is very kind-hearted. He's friendly, that he will sacrifice for others. He's a bit selfless. He's kind-hearted. So there were some really good pieces of evidence in this dialogue, and the purpose of that dialogue was, again, to reveal something about the characters. And that was the work that we did today. So just keep in mind the purposes of dialogue. Number 1, to reveal something about the characters. Number 2, to reveal something about the setting. Or number 3, which we'll get into more as we continue with the context of the novel, to reveal or propel the conflict forward. So as we begin to read chapters 3 and 4, we'll look at the different conflicts that are arising and talk about how that dialogue helps to drive those conflicts forward.